A different type of assessment entirely is to do an interview style or a one-on-one assessment. This can be done a number of ways, but in particular, if students have something to work on for a lesson or two, throughout that period, you can just grab students one by one and informally just ask them a bunch of questions. You might have a whole bunch of questions and you're just going to ask them a few, but the great thing about this is it allows them a lot of room for their self-differentiation. You might just say something like, tell me about what a conjunction is. And that's your prompt. And depending on how much information they can give you and how much support you need, how many cues you need to give them, that might reflect the grade of how much support they've had versus how independent their response is and how detailed their response is. It's a very quick assessment. The beauty of this is that it's basically marked live as you're having the conversation. You're like, yep, great, that was an A-level response. It's very quick, doesn't involve any of your time, and particularly if students have got things to work on during that time, you're just using it during the lesson. You can have a set of questions so that the students are getting variety. They're not just going to go back in the room and go, hey, they're going to ask you about this. Make sure you know it. If you really wanted to, you could have two separate areas. So you could pull them out, ask them a question, and they go, cool, just hang out in this space until the rest of the class is done. Let's consider this example. So what I've done here is I had a themed unit again. So this was talking about a chemistry topic, but this assessment, this one-on-one interview, has a scenario. Students in this test are applying to work for the Department of Chemical Threats and Radiation, which conveniently is an acronym for doctor. But I've given them this little script. This is what I would read to them when they walk into the room or come outside, and I would say, welcome to the Department of Chemical Threats and Radiation. You're doing an interview, so this is like an aptitude test that you would do for a job. So it does have that kind of real world link application. But I say, like, I'm going to ask you a few questions. I want you to answer honestly and accurately. I'm not looking for how well you answer the question as much as how well you understand the concept. So the good thing about this is I'm watching them write on their little piece of scrap paper before they give me an answer, and I'm making notes on my marking sheet as I go. So I'm marking live, but I'm also looking at what are they doing? Are they getting the concept? And I can see in person when they make a small mistake. And I can choose whether I prompt that or I might just leave it and go, look, you know, the concept is completely fine. They just made a tiny mistake. So I might penalize them a very small amount, maybe not at all, if I'm looking at the concept. But then when we start, this is what it looks like for the student. So on a screen in the room, they see this. And when we begin, the timer starts and the music plays. So we are creating a bit of a tense atmosphere here. Then the questions are going to appear. So I'll read it, but it'll also be on the screen in case they need that cue. So I'll say, here you go, here's question 1. And I'll watch them write it if they need to, otherwise they'll just give me the answer straight away. Then I'll go, all right, question 2. And we follow this pattern. One thing that's a little bit different though, at question 4, you'll notice there's a little tick here. This is an interactive PowerPoint. If they get this question correct, I can tick it, and what it's doing now is it's transitioning to a more complex version of that question. So we're differentiating live. If they get this question, I give them a harder one. If they don't get this, that's fine. They've achieved that standard. But if I really want to test the higher level, they need to get that question. And you'll see that this appears throughout the process. There are multiple questions with ticks that can all be differentiated. If they don't get it wrong, I'm clearly not going to click the tick and give them the higher order question, because they need the basics first. So on the one hand, this looks like a really sort of stressful scenario. It's the opposite of what I've talked about so far. I'm putting them in a one-on-one scenario. There's music, there's this really tense sound effect that gets worse as the timer gets closer to 0, and it sounds like the worst conditions for an assessment. But if this is an assessment and you want to test them under pressure, you want to build some of that resilience, it's also quite engaging. Surprisingly, when I ran this with my class, I tested everyone in this format, and then a few lessons later, I gave them a paper test of all of the same concepts. I just changed the numbers around. The students, nearly in all cases except 2, for a class of 24, did better in this sort of high stress scenario than they did in the paper test. Whether that's because I'm there to analyze their process and have the conversation, or whether it's just for whatever reason they performed better in this scenario, I can't explain that. I need to do more research. But the main thing was that I didn't see a significant drop that I maybe thought I would get when I trialed this. And at the same time, it's something different. It's a bit more engaging, it's a bit more exciting. There's a scenario to it, so we're applying that real world context. It's application-based assessment, and it's very, very immersive for the students versus just a paper test with this many questions.